Hey everybody, welcome. Happy Friday. The weekend is finally here, and you know how it is here at Inkarnate. We kick it off with another live stream. And today I'm going to be showing users how to create elevation with 3 simple steps using the fantasy battle map style. Sometimes your battle maps can seem to be lacking some depth or elevation, right? You want to show that maybe your players are fighting on a tall cliff and then looking down, there's a ravine and it's way far down. How do we create that sense of elevation? We're going to do it with 3 simple steps. All right. First, we're going to be stacking our stamps on top of each other. That means using cliffs, rocks, whatever terrain that we want to kind of stack upward. You start from the ground up. Whenever you're building a battle map, or really any map, you build from the ground up. So we're going to start with stacking our stamps. That means picking whatever stamp that you're going to be using. You're also then going to be adding contrast. Contrast meaning light and shadows. So light and shadow can make things have more dimension. They can give them a sense of depth. So we're definitely going to be doing that. And finally, we're going to be doing what's called forced perspective, using different varieties of scales of stamps. So we'll be going that as well. So pretty easy, 3 simple steps. We'll go ahead and just jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and just fill the entire screen with the add mode of the mask tool real quick. So let's go to fill all. Now I have the add mode of that mask tool there. Just so you know, I am using just your standard landscape aspect ratio. So your 4:3, nothing special there. And I'm going to, first, I'm going to go over a couple stamps that you use when creating elevation. For instance, your line tool, or if you're using the shape tool, there's a specific strokes that you want to use, right? Now, a lot of these strokes have like what's called a clipping mask on them, and a clipping mask just picks up whatever's on the FG layer. But I'm going to go ahead and just place a couple cliffs down so you can kind of see them. You can see what you're working with. And what's really nice about lines and shapes is that I can make a series of these like this, and then I can change them at any times with a line. So maybe I want to switch over to this desert cliff, and then I want to switch over to this more craggy hill, and then I want to switch over to this more softer hill. So these are the stamps. I mean, there's a lot of different cliffs that you can use and you can choose from for making the elevation, but these are the ones that I currently use. Now, once we go into 2.0, we're going to be having a lot more options with terrain. I want to share some of those with you. That way we can showcase some of that awesome 2.0 stuff. So I'll separate this apart. If you go into the catalog here, if I type in cliff, you'll see that there's some of these really, really nice new cliffs in here. So you have this cliff right here, kind of craggy. It's got some silver ore in it. I'll bring the scale down a little bit so you can kind of, that way there's some room for it. There's also this one as well. Kind of show you these cool ones. There's also like this one right here. Looks like the cliff has some kind of angle to it. So lots of different cliffs that you can choose from. I'm really excited for the 2.0 release because these are going to be really, really helpful. So you have all these different types of cliff stamps that you can kind of choose from for your strokes. So make sure that you choose which ones that you want. Yes, these are assets to come. They're going to be released with the 2.0 launch. We don't have an exact date, but we're hoping to shoot for sometime this summer. I just want to let you know. I don't want to go over too much of the 2.0 stuff because I want to make sure that you can do this elevation things in the app as is right now and not focus too much on 2.0. But these are the ones that I use a lot. There's a lot of different cliffs to choose from, but these are the ones we're going to be using in this particular showcase or this particular example. Now, I want to also kind of go over like what each one of these cliffs kind of represent a little bit. So I'll kind of move these over and you can see each one. And one thing that you'll kind of notice is like, if I'm at a side angle, if this is a cliff going straight up, most of these are going to represent like just a straight cliff going up. For this piece right here, this one, it's just a cliff going straight up like this. It doesn't have to be straight, but it's a cliff almost going straight up. But how is it that I want to show maybe that there's like a gradual change instead of just a drop off? Because that gradual change, how do I show that gradual change? And it's not too complex. You should choose one stamp to be the drop off and then pick another stamp to be the lighter elevation. So for instance, it would look something like this. So like here's the straight drop off, my mistake. I'll use a different one here. Like there's a drop off here, and then there's some elevation that goes down like that before it hits the ground. How is it that I portray that? Well, these cliffs right here seem to have like a straight drop off because the line work just stops. But if you wanted to take like a hard cliff, the more craggy cliff right here, and just put it underneath of it, then you have creating some form of like gradual kind of incline. And then you can take the softer one, bring it down like this, and then you have, I think I have to flip it to its facing the right way. And then you can put this other hill right next to each other. So what you have is this kind of gradual incline instead of this straight down. So that's going to be kind of helpful, right? You have a little bit of this like that. So this is what I mean by stacking stamps on top of each other, so that you have that. But what happens if I want to have a really tall cliff that does go straight down? Then I would just stack multiple of these or whatever cliff that you want to use on top of each other. Just know that when you copy and paste them, you do want to change what's called the offset. So you notice how all of the stamps, all of these lines look exactly the same, and that looks odd. It wouldn't look like that. You would go ahead and click the clog and then click up here where it says offset, and then you could just offset like this, and then do it to each one so that way you don't have those repeating elements in top of it. So I can go over here like this and change the offset like that. So stacking stamps on top of each other is a way to kind of create that elevation. And you can even do some other tricks as well. So stacking is not complex. What about creating like a sense of depth? Right now, when I look at these three lines right here, it just looks like a bunch of walls stacked up against each other. How is it that I get them to have this sense of depth? And that goes into step 2, which is using contrast. So if I select that bottom cliff, the one that's at the very bottom, I can go over and click color adjustments. You see open stroke color adjustments. If I click that, and if I bring the brightness down like this, you'll start to notice that there's a contrast between the darker cliff and the lighter cliff. And what we're going to be doing here is remembering this very simple rule. Things that are farther down are going to be darker, and things that are higher up are going to be lighter. So it's the light against the dark that creates this sense of contrast. So the same thing, I want to create a gradient of dark just to lightest. So this middle one that I have selected should also be a little bit darker, but it shouldn't be as dark or darker than the bottom one, but it also shouldn't be lighter or as light as the top one. And so now you're creating this sense of depth by changing the brightness of each set. And so then I could go ahead and, if I wanted to, I could just take another one of those, copy, paste, put it on top, bring the brightness up a little bit. And then what we're doing is we have this sense of depth using that. And again, I want to change that offset. Just always remember, you have to change the offset. Otherwise, the artifacts in the line are all going to be exactly the same, and that just looks really unnatural. But you get the concept, right? Using darks and then using lights, the contrast, do it. There are multiple ways of going about doing this as well. Instead of just using changing the brightness of a stamp, you can also use shadow, light and shadow as well. So I could go ahead and just go to the brush, choose the color black. I'm going to choose top layer. That means it's going to paint on top of everything. And I go over to my right panel where it says layers top, and I click this little cog, change that blend mode to overlay like that. And then I'm going to change my opacity to about 30%. I generally try not to go any higher than that, because when you're painting, you generally want to do multiple strokes instead of one large stroke, multiple strokes. So one way to show height is, how do I show that this part over here on the right side is higher up than the bottom part? I can just take that shadow and just paint right here. And already you can see that there is a little bit of a difference, right? We used darker against light to show height. And then we can add another stroke that just goes right against here like this, because we want to create what's called ambient occlusion. And that's going to be wherever the cliffs come in contact with the ground, we're going to create a harder, thicker light or shadow that goes around the bottom part like this. So I'll bring it up even more and just create this harder, thicker line. It doesn't have to be that hard, but you can create this harder, thicker line. And then already you can see a sense of depth. It doesn't have to be that thick. But you get the concepts, right? Using contrast is how you create this sense of depth. So it's not complex, it's pretty easy stuff. And then on top of that, I might want to add, you notice that this cliff wall kind of looks unnatural. It's just completely straight. Maybe throw in some rocks of some kind. I think there might be some desert rocks or whatever. You can throw in these desert rocks and kind of place them along the edge here. And then maybe go down a layer and then bring the brightness down on them. And then one thing you're going to see a lot on cliffs is erosion. So put lots of boulders and larger or smaller rocks kind of at the base to kind of represent that erosion. Just remember, to create the depth, you just need to make sure that the rocks are about the same brightness or darkness as that bottom cliff there. So you're kind of getting the concepts about understanding some depth there. I'm going to quickly just save this real quick so that way I don't lose any of my changes. And then we'll move on to that third step, which is using false perspective. And basically what false perspective is you're just tricking the viewer's eye or your player's eye to think that things down there at the bottom are way further down, while things at the top of the cliff are way higher up. And the way that we do that is simply using scale. You can also use a blur effect, but scale is very helpful. So for instance, let's put a tree. We'll pick a nice tree here. Let's go with this tree right here. To show that this cliff is higher up, I'll pick a tree and make them kind of bigger. But if I wanted to show that this was further down, I would bring the scale of the tree down as well, right? And already it begins to kind of feel like, okay, wow, there is a difference between the tree at the top and a tree at the bottom to kind of give this false sense of perspective, right? I'll even kind of overlap a little bit here. So whenever you want to show a big discrepancy in elevation, things that are at the bottom part, make them smaller, and stamps at the top, make them bigger. And then also make them brighter as well, right? Stamps that are at the bottom of the cliff will be a little bit darker. Stamps at the top will be a little bit brighter. That's that contrast that we were talking about in step 2. So really, it's not too complex on how to kind of create a sense of depth, really. It's just stacking the stamps in the way that you want, whether you want them to be a straight decline, straight incline, going straight down, or if you want a gradual incline using hills to do that, because that's really the trick, is showing various elevations on that way. So making that part is not too complex. So let's go ahead and try now applying those we can try to finish this and maybe add a couple more things to it to create more sense of elevation. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to quickly just change the textures. I'm going to blend this in real quick, and then we'll also change things up on the ground texture as well. Because remember, there's that rule. Things that are further down or further away are going to be smaller. I also need to change the texture as well. So I need to go choose that grass texture, make sure I'm set to the FG layer, and then I'm going to bring the texture scale down, bring it down quite a bit to show the discrepancy, and then I can go in and paint this like this. There we go. And you'll see the discrepancy or the change now. It's much further down, and so the texture is much smaller, just like the stamps are much smaller. So it's not complex, really. It's really just following those 3 simple kind of rules. Okay, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and blend these together. So I'll probably take some desert textures and I'm going to apply them up here like this. I think that looks a little off. I'll just desaturate it a little bit to kind of fit more of the color that I want here. I'll just fill the whole thing with that color, just like the whole cliff seems to be that way. And I might do some rotating as well. And let's also change the scale so there's some changes in the size, so it's not all the exact same size. There we go. So now we have some interesting there. Next, I'll want to create this illusion of erosion. So I'll use a cracked ground texture. This cracked ground texture is good. Don't forget to change the scale. And I'll bring the opacity down just a little bit. And then wherever it's coming into contact with the wall. You just put some cracked ground there, and we'll give this kind of illusion of erosion there. Now I can go ahead and start creating some different elevations on top of this. We have this big drop off on this cliff right here. Let's go ahead and add some more cliffs to it, but this time not a straight line. Maybe I'll make a cliff that kind of goes like this. And then cool trick here, when it does to creating natural formations, is don't all have them all be exactly the same. So don't all have a bunch being exactly like this. Change it up a little bit. Go here, add something to the side right here. Add another one that maybe loops in this way and then goes that way. Maybe add one that goes in like this, right? Because what makes it interesting is having various rock formations. That makes it more interesting. Notice that this just looks like a straight line and that looks off, right? So I'll just go ahead and create these series of stamps right here. So then I'll go ahead and apply some of the things that we talked about. I'll stack some stamps. So I'll select every single one of these. Let's make sure I have them all selected. Copy, paste. Let's go ahead and do some gradual elevation changes. I'll bring this down a layer and I'll place these stamps right underneath. And I think there's shadows on here. I think I'll turn off. Or let me see. Okay, I think that looks fine. Add that there. That looks good. And then I'll do it again. I'm going to copy paste and I'll do some softer hills. I'll place those down underneath. There we go. So you already see some elevation changes right there, right? Hey, first-time Chattel Mistletoe. Glad that you're here, by the way. We're doing some elevation. So already you can kind of see that there's been some elevation changes. Another first-time chatter. Glad that you're here, by the way. Right, so we've applied those first techniques. What I should do is I should probably make these higher elevations a little bit brighter. So I should take this stamp and bring the brightness up a little bit more, and then bring this one and bring the brightness up a little bit more. I am not the owner of Inkarnate, by the way. Nope, I just work for them. I'm one of many awesome team members that help to keep this tool working and thriving. All right, so one thing you can also do, by the way, is you can use light sources to create an elevation change. So we'll go over that as well. Okay, as for I noticed there someone mentioned underwater stuff. Just use the luminosity blend mode. Don't forget that luminosity does not pick up the brightness. You'll have to change the brightness and the darkness of it to match with whatever texture is beneath it a little bit. So just like before, I'm just going to use the top layer. I'm going to use the color black. I'm going to go at 30%. And I'm going to take this and I'm just going to paint some shadows along this edge right here. So paint some shadows here, paint some shadows here, paint some shadows here. Very helpful. And then I'll bring the opacity up just a little bit more, bring the size down, and then don't forget to add that harder ambient occlusion. So right here, add that harder, right? And you're going to go along where that cliff, where the desert cliff is. And this will give it that extra sense of depth. There we go. Looking good. One more right here. There we go. Now you really have that sense of depth. Makes a huge change. And then we'll go ahead and take foreground and we'll switch back over to our cracked ground here. And we'll add that cracked ground wherever that cliff is there. So you have some nice elevation there. That looks good. One other thing we can do is we can also make a little plateau, like a little island. So I'll use the shape tool. I'm going to use the same cliff here, and I'm just going to make a little shape like this. You notice that they're facing the wrong way. If you go up to the left panel here and say flip stroke vertically, it will flip it. And then you have this nice flipped piece right here. And we'll add this here so that at least there's some extra elevation here to break that up. And then what I should probably do is I should make this a little bit brighter. So I'll grab that same texture I used up here and I'll bring the brightness up just a tad. You go over to the settings, bring the brightness up a little bit, and then I'll just bring that brighter texture right on top here. And then just like before, I'll paint on my shadows. Just right along this ledge here, paint in some shadows. And then there's a nice little crevice right here. We'll make it a little bit darker in that crevice right there. And then I'll bring the size down and then add that harder ambient occlusion in there. There you go. Okay. So you do have some differences there, and then we'll add that, finally we'll add that cracked ground again. Let's see, right here it is. Okay, there you have some cracked ground. Right at the top there. Okay, I have 194 changes, so I'll quickly save it. Yeah, it does make a huge difference, adding in that contrast and shadow. So just the trick is really just to follow those 3 steps there. You know, I think roasted beans, that's a great question, but this is specifically geared towards battle maps. But if you are trying to figure out how to do that, we can do a whole stream dedicated to it, because there's a vast array of techniques that you could use. Because I have noticed something about Inkarnate maps is they are a little flat when it comes to world maps. And it is kind of hard to kind of Tetris all of those cliffs together. But I mean, that is the trick though. It is using cliffs. And we'll save that for a different stream, and I will gladly show you that, because I do have a bunch of techniques on how to do that, because I do admit that the Inkarnate maps can seem a little flat. That is so true. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and move on to the third part again, where we've already applied the stack stamps, and then we applied the shadow work. Let's continue on with using the false perspective, or using forced perspective. So I want to take these bigger trees, right? This is the very top that you can get. So we'll put trees very big here at the top. And then to show that this cliff is only, this top part is just a little bit smaller, a little bit further down, we'll bring the size down a little bit there. And then you really have this sense of kind of false perspective here, right? With the 3 different variations of tree sizes. Very big trees at the very highest point, and then very small trees at the very smallest point. And you can kind of see the perspective starts to kind of come together there. We can add even more perspective to this by adding maybe a water source, and then maybe having some cliffs be underwater. So let's do that. Let's take a cliff of our choice, whichever one we want to use. Let's use this one. And then we'll go ahead and create a little river that kind of goes like this. You notice the cliff's facing the wrong way. Just click. And if you're wondering why the cliff faces the wrong way, it depends on the direction in which you're clicking and holding the mouse. But if it isn't facing the right way, just remember you can easily just flip this, okay? What I want to do is I want to bring the cliff size really down quite a bit, because it is quite a bit further down. And then I'll go ahead and go to the subtract mode of the mask tool. I'll use a circular brush, and I'm just going to quickly go in here and kind of just remove this. I'm just going to follow this. I'll make sure to turn off all the mask effects, and I'll change the BG color, but I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of this. We'll change it to a bluish watercolor. So I'll turn off the mask effects. I don't need that on. And then I will also go change this to a watercolor. Just choose water in the catalog. It should be the BG layer fill. Oopsie, at 100%. There we go. And now you have some water there. Okay. Now, what happens if I want to show cliffs being underwater, right? We want to continue to show more elevation changes, because there is going to be a lot more elevation changes. Let's maybe take this exact same line that we just created, and let's add a cliff to it. But we're going to make the cliff smaller. We're going to bring it down a layer, and then we're going to put it underneath like this. Then we're going to go up to the blend mode, down to this blend mode, and we're going to choose luminosity. You see how it becomes the same color of whatever texture is beneath it, but you notice that it's super bright. So you'll have to make those changes. So what I do is I go into open stroke color adjustments and bring the brightness down like this, and then bring the contrast down a little bit as well. And then I'll bring the brightness down like this a little bit, and then what you have is it looks like there are some cliff that's underwater, right? Again, creating a further sense of depth. What happens if we want to create more depth? Like maybe there's some rocks underwater that are popping out of the water and partially under the water. How do we do that? Right? So this is more about the elevation thing. We'll choose 2 rocks. We'll use the larger ones. Let's use the ones that are not. Here's some ones that are going to be in the 2.0. These are the train editions. Some really, really beautiful, beautiful art. These are beautiful rocks. I'm excited for the 2.0 release so that we can show these. I'm going to look for, I think there is a big rock right here. We're going to go in a little bit, and I'm going to line this up to where it kind of fits in like this. So I'll put it right there like that. This one's going to be underwater, so I'll do that luminosity blend mode trick. I'll bring the contrast down. I'll bring the brightness down. This part of the rock is underwater. I'll just copy and paste that rock, and then I'll change the blend mode back to normal. I'll bring the brightness up just a little bit, and then I can just place this just right on top like this. And then you have a part of the rock underwater and a part of the rock on top of the water. And you don't have to use the exact same rock. You can change up which rocks you use. But this is a way of kind of like showing more depth. Maybe I want a series of rocks along the shoreline. Let's do that. So we'll copy and paste this. Undo, copy, paste. Put this down a layer. Oopsie, this one. Very simple, very effective, very easy to do. And just kind of put that underneath. And now you have a nice rock formation under the water right there like that. And you can make a series of those that kind of go all along through here. So now you have some nice formations, because I will say what happens is that when you make just a straight line like this, it looks a little odd. There's usually like maybe some rocks on the side. Maybe there's a log going half in the water, half out of the water. All of these things are really, really helpful, because I do know that depth in water can be kind of confusing, but this is really the best route that I've noticed, is stacking these rocks. You can also place things underwater, like maybe you want to have like right here, there's this water right here. There's some artifacts inside of it. We can just apply some of this. Let's change it to where it's a little bit more on the blue side of things. There we go. And if I just apply this blue right here, let me make sure that the scale is down a little bit as well. So I'll apply this scale here, put a little bit more blue, a little more artifacts in here. That looks a little better. I'll quickly save. Thank you, first time chatter, by the way. I don't really care much for that perfect straight line that I made here, but I offsetted it a little bit with the curved cliffs. So not always the best thing, but I think overall it's okay. And we'll continue kind of adding more stuff underwater, because we want to continue to create this sense of depth. We have this opportunity to show a really high height, which is the top of the mountain, that cliff area, and then we want to show the lowest depth, which is going to be under that water, whether this is a lake, a river, or maybe it's the ocean. It could be any of those things. So what I'll do is I'll maybe want to choose some reeds. And again, I'll follow that technique of using the luminosity blend mode like that. And I'll just place it down so I can kind of see what it looks like. Bring that contrast down, bring that brightness down. And then I can take these reeds like this, copy, paste, and then let's turn off random rotate. Let's go over to area. We're going to bring the area up like this, so we have multiple, and we'll bring the size down because this looks really, really big. This reed is quite massive. We'll make it a little bit smaller, and then I can take these reeds and then kind of place them under the water. Let's rotate them a little bit like this. And we'll create this illusion of reeds underwater. And I'm going to rotate them to where the reeds are lined up with the same direction as the cliff. There we go. Okay. And then what I want to do next is to show that there's depth, like the further out that you go, the deeper it gets. We'll go ahead and take the ones that are far off to the side like this, and we can simply just bring the opacity down. And what we're doing here is we're creating this illusion that there's a gradual decline. As the further out in the water you go, the deeper that it gets. And so to show that depth, we're changing the opacity to make it look like it's kind of, they're disappearing into the water. So we'll take all these ones right here. We'll bring the opacity down. We'll take these. We'll bring the opacity down. And then we'll bring these down and bring the opacity down. There we go. And then you'll get this sense. Now, to create a more depth, we can also do things like put waves on top, because remember, the point here is to show elevation. I can take a wave. You can either use a wave stamp, or you can just use a wave line tool. I think both work. Let me type in wave real quick. Wave will give you a little bit more freedom. But just make sure that the wave is above these stamps right here. So these are at -1. This is at -2. We want to bring it up to where it's 1 over. We'll bring the scale down. I'll also bring the opacity down a little bit because I want them to be see-through enough. And I'm going to place it on top just to make sure I can see it. It is perfect. And then I'll go ahead and create just a series of waves that are over the top of, so that way it kind of looks like those reeds are underneath. I don't really care much for the way these waves look. We'll make some changes to them. It's really cool. You can select every single one of them, select all of the style. We'll flip it. For starters, it's facing the wrong way, or some of them are facing the wrong way. I think just this one's facing the wrong way. The other ones are okay. I'll select them all. I don't care much for the cap. There we go. Yeah, the caps don't look good. Let's select every single one of these. Let's select all these lines. Let's change the stamp scale. Let's turn off the caps. Let's also change the blend mode to maybe overlay. Let's bring the opacity up a little bit. There we go. So we have some waves kind of going in there like this. And the waves are on top. Notice how the waves are on top of the reeds. That's how you kind of show depth. Remember, we talked about stacking stamps. Stacking stamps is how you do it. So not complex. So pretty easy stuff there. So not hard to figure out how to make that gradual decline. The other trick is to have something be darker. So if I want to show that the water is much, much darker or much, much deeper, I simply bring the brightness down. So wherever the water is deepest, I'll go ahead and just apply on the BG right over here just to make it darker. Let's go with 100%. And you can see here that this is much, much deeper in this area by going and making it darker. This part is deeper, this part is deeper. I don't normally recommend doing 100%. When you're doing the depth in the water, you want to show depth in the water, you'll start at generally a lower opacity and then kind of paint a gradual darker the further you get away. So depth in water or elevation in water, not complex. Just keep stacking them on top of each other. I'll go quickly just save it. Not complex, pretty easy stuff. And then there's another thing that you can also do as well. There's a final thing that you can do, which is you can also use like a blur to like blur things so that way the things that are way further away, there's a slight blur to it. So I can like select all these things down here and then just apply like a very small like blur to it. So let me only select stamps. So go up here to select, turn all, select here, and then I can select all of these and then go over to blur. And you can kind of bring the blur up. And if you want to show that things are way further down, you can also simply just do a little bit of a blur. I'll go ahead and make sure that I can select everything as well. You want to make sure that those cliffs are blurred. Everything has to be blurred if you're going to go down at the bottom. You can, without actually blurring, I got to figure out exactly how to blur the ground part. I can also use a filter for that. But if you want, you can also blur things that are further down to give it that sense of contrast, right? The things at the very top where your players are actually walking around, which is the top of this mountain or cliff right here, it's in focus. It's sharpened, right? It's not blurred. Your players aren't going to be moving around down here because if they fall off, they're probably going to die unless they use magic or something. So it's okay to blur the part that's way farther down. If you wanted to show that this is a really far down ravine down there, you can blur things and it won't affect any of your gameplay because your players aren't actually going down there. Because if the area in which combat is taking place is blurry, not going to work very well as a battle map, right? But again, you can blurry those areas that are meant to show a sense of depth and distance. So not complex, pretty easy stuff. Adding in those blurs, very, very helpful. Where are we at for time here? 3:35, lots of time. I think we will just add some final details. We'll just kind of finish up this map. I'll try to add a couple more interesting things to it so it doesn't look all the same. Let's go ahead and use these rocks right here. I'm not sure there are big desert rocks. I'm not 100% satisfied with this, how straight this cliff is here. And so one way that I've kind of done to like make a cliff look a little more jagged and more interesting is to just use a big rock or any kind of rock like this and just change the blend mode to luminosity. We'll bring that brightness up. And you can just take a rock like this and just kind of place it. Let's use this one instead. It's a little bit more interesting. Maybe this one. We'll see which one works best. Maybe this one. You can just place them along the ledge here because a cliff wall isn't just like this straight cliff. There's usually some rocks. It's bumpy. And I can just go over to this luminosity blend mode here and then create a rock right here. And I can create another one like over here somewhere. And what this will do is it will break up that weird like formation that I have that I don't really care for. So I'll just add another one here. And maybe I'll add a smaller one like right about there. And we'll just change those blend modes so they kind of match in. Turn the shadow off, change the blend mode. And then we'll use that same technique, right? I've stacked the stamps. Now I want to go over to the top layer, choose black. And then we'll add in the shadow work for along this ledge here. So some shadow work here. You can also add some shadow work along some of the ledge here. So here. There you go. And then wherever you have big rocks, you generally have smaller rocks, right? Where there's erosion going on. I made these rocks a little too big. I'll select all of them in the set and I'll just kind of bring them down in size. There we go. That was kind of getting on my nerves a little bit. And then wherever you have big rocks, put smaller rocks. So let me turn the area back to 0 and I'll just kind of place a bunch of smaller rocks right next to the bigger rocks like this, along this ledge here, along here, along here, along here, and then I'll use the darker ones along this edge. Lots of erosion going on here. One thing you could also do is to show like an avalanche. That could be helpful. You could use this rubble right here. This rubble works great. And if I just kind of place it right on top like this, and then I'll change the blend mode as well. Let's go with luminosity. And then I can kind of place this along this ledge here. And what you have here is this sense of like erosion, like this part of that cliff fell apart and it's eroding a little bit. Just make sure that you add a little bit more at the bottom because all of that has to fall somewhere and collect somewhere. So if I place this here, it looks like it fell down and then collected down here at the bottom. So you have this nice erosion kind of happening here. That's helpful. We can create a little bit more erosion like right here. Let's create some right here, some erosion there. And I will change the blend mode for this one as well, so that way it kind of matches better. So I'll place that there. Let's place it up a layer, and then I'll use another one like this, and then place it down like this to bring it down a layer like this. And so you have this nice erosion, creating this nice erosion, and that's very, very nice. I find that very helpful. And then for my battle maps, I always like to add ways of like being able to walk and go to different places. So I'll go ahead and use some logs in the Hell terrain pack. There are these great logs right here. These are absolutely perfect for like bridging a gap. Like maybe I want to have a gap going across this island here. Just know that I have to repaint. I have to repaint this. Notice how my painting from the top layer is there. This is really easy. Just go top layer, go to erase, and then just erase the shading that you did on this log here. And that way it doesn't look like the shadowing is all off that's there. So we have that nice there. Let's add like maybe another log that kind of goes up. Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller, like make this tree look like it kind of fell down. Put it down there. Let's use a bigger one. Let's go up here and let's put like a little stump that's kind of coming out of this tree right here. And we'll make it a little bit bigger because it's higher up. And then there is another one that I like, this one right here. This one is nice. We want to show a way for players to kind of get up here, or we can put one on top going across this rock right here. We can do that. We could have it going up like this so that players can get up top like this. That way they can go up this side, they can go around this side. And I think what I'll do is I'll also move this tree over to here. That way my players can walk over to the next one. Maybe they can do a little jump to go from this rock to this plateau right here. That looks good. Let's go ahead and add some details down here. What I think I'll do is I'll take a bunch of these trees and I'll make it look like there's a forest at the, I'm going to add a forest at the base. You know, a lot of forests are at the base of mountains. And so what I'll do is I'll just take a bunch of these trees and kind of create this thick forest. But what I'll do is I don't want it to cover the entire ground. I'll have some be over here like this. And then I'll have one be over here and then maybe some along this edge. And then just to show some variation, I'll have some different sizes here. There we go. Here, put some along here, here. And then maybe I want to add some grass. You notice that the texture at the base here is really kind of odd. Why don't we add some different stuff at the base to make it more interesting? For instance, let's go into the catalog and we'll type in grass. There should be some of this grass right here. And there's this stuff right here from our jungle. Let's use that. We'll bring the scale down like this. And I think I'll bring the brightness down a little bit because what I'm noticing is that notice how the alpha texture of the grass at 100%, it doesn't contrast very well against the grass texture I'm already using. By bringing the brightness down, you'll notice that the grass really starts to pop out a little bit more. It's bright against dark. So now I can go in like this and just go, oopsie, I did top layer, go to the FG layer, and then I can start applying this grass texture. That's a little too dark, actually. Let's make it a little bit brighter. My mistake. Didn't want to make it that dark. Let's try that. There we go. Nope, still too dark. The reason why is because I use the topped layer, and so I'm kind of competing with that a little bit, so I'll bring the brightness right about there. I think that looks good. There we go, perfect. And we'll go ahead and kind of just place grass wherever there's trees. I'll kind of place some grass along the tree line. And you can also just change the rotation as well. I'm just not doing that, but you can change the rotation randomly with the grass so it's not all facing the same way. But for now, I think this will do just fine. And then wherever there's rubble, you would kind of expect some dirt. You notice how the rubble just goes straight from rock to grass? That looks a little odd, right? So what I should do is maybe use some kind of dirt or something at the base, because all of that rock, as it was collapsing and falling down, it crumbled into more finer granulation instead of just having that green grass there, right? So I should probably take some kind of dirt texture of some kind. Dirt, doesn't really matter which one I use. Let's use this jungle one right here. And I'll bring the opacity down a little bit so I can use multiple strokes. And then just at the base, wherever there is that crumbling dirt, we'll put a little bit of this dirt on here like this. And in fact, everywhere I see the base of the cliff, I should probably add a little bit of dirt there. Because where is that erosion coming from, right? Where do I put it? So there should be some erosion going along here. There we go. And then I want to add some further erosion. So I should probably add some rocks. So I think there should be some alphas. Let's use this alpha. Let's see, is this one it? Small stone. Let's just use this small stones right here. Let's change the brightness a little bit. Let's change the scale. There we go. Okay, and then I'll just go ahead and apply some rock along here as well. Because, again, it's this erosion that's going on at the base. There we go. Let me take a step back and look at it. Okay, cool. There we go. Same thing here. I should probably add a little bit here for the erosion that's going on there. Maybe some here. Some erosion that's taking place here. There we go. I'll quickly save it because I've got 442 changes. That's quite a bit. So there's a lot going on here, right? So you're starting to get, I think you get the general idea on how the elevation thing works. And we'll quickly just review it. It's just stacking your stamps, right? Pick whatever stamps that you want. Don't forget that there's a difference between a quick drop-off. Exactly. What could go wrong at 442 changes? If you're going to do a straight drop-off, you can just use one cliff line or stamp or whatever, right? But if you want to show that gradual incline or decline, don't forget to use those hills, because those hills are meant to show a gradual elevation change instead of that straight drop off. Don't forget you can also stack multiple cliffs on top of each other. Just don't forget to have the ones at the bottom, make sure that they're sticking out a little bit so that that way you can actually see that they're stacked up. If you're just going to stack them right on top of each other, right exactly on top of each other, you won't actually see an elevation change. So you do have to make them pop out a little bit from to each other to kind of helps it out or so. Okay, now once you've learned to stack stamps, then you'll want to do that next step, which is contrast. Remember how flat this map looked? I'll show you real quick. Watch what happens when I go to the top layer. I go to 100%, I'm going to go to erase, and I'm just going to clear it all. Oopsie, my bad. It should be erase top clear. Let me see here. My mistake. What'd I do here? Oh, I see. I've got the wrong thing selected here. Let me undo this real quick. Restore. Erase top. There you go. Okay, now you can see what it looks like. So if I go over like this, you'll see the difference when I remove all the shadow work. You see what happens? It's simply a big difference, right? You can see that there's a massive difference. So if I go back to undo, you'll see that the shadow work does make a big difference in showing that trick. Now, you don't have to use the top layer, by the way. I just like using the top layer because it goes on top of everything, and that kind of helps me to kind of get all the shadows in at once without having to use other methods. But there are other methods. For instance, you could use the shape or the line tool to create shadow work. That's not complex. You would just use a line. You would just use a black or whatever color you want for the shadow, and then you would simply blur it, and then that you would have a shadow that way. You can also take a shape, have no stroke, use a fill, black, whatever color you want, and then just bring the opacity down and blur it. Okay, so there's multiple ways to do shadow work. You don't necessarily have to always just use the top layer, because a top layer is even on top of filters. So when you are using a filter, you'll notice that the top layer is on top of it. And that's why I use the overlay blend mode, because it doesn't affect the filter quite as oddly. So just remember that if you want to use shadows with the top layer, I would just switch over to the overlay blend mode so that way you can do that. So very, very helpful. All right, well, I think that's it. I think I went over all three of the steps. We went over them multiple times by adding multiple cliffs and stuff. I think this stuff is pretty easy to put together. It's not complex. Feel free to ask me any questions in Discord. If you have any questions, I'm glad to help you out. We will, by the way, cover, someone mentioned in the chat, we will cover how to create a sense of like coastal cliffs. So we'll go over that in another stream. I like that idea. I think that sounds good. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you all so much. Thanks for being here. Have a great weekend, and I will see you all next week, okay? Stay safe and healthy, and merry map making. Bye, everybody.